So just getting started here. So as I mentioned today, we have two presenters today. Dr. Janet Craig is a family physician in Edmonton, and she's the Edmonton Zone Physician Champion with the AMA ACT team. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Van Nguyen, and I'm the Edmonton Zone Champion. And I'll be your facilitator today. Angile is a consultant with the AMA ACT team, and she's also the ACT co-lead of the Provincial Practice Facilitator Network. Next slide, please. We'll start off with just a privacy statement in that the first half of today's session will be recorded. The recording will be available for you and is for the intention of quality and training purposes and to share with those who are unable to attend. The recorded sessions will be emailed to the Physician Champion Network membership and made available to some limited AMA staff and or AMA contractors. And by participating in this training session or webinar, participants understand and consent to the webinar being shared in this way. Thank you. I'd like to start off the presentation with the treaty acknowledgement. We'd like to recognize that we are webcasting from and to many different parts of Alberta today. The province of Alberta is located on Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territory, and is a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples. This program, in terms of disclosure of financial support, has not received any financial, or next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Janet Craig.
Yeah. Just my disclosures, I do some administrative work and receive some honorarious consulting fees from the Alberta College of Family Physicians, the Alberta Medical Association, University of Alberta, Custom Learning Systems, and the Edmonton West PCN. Angile?
Yep, and I'm Angile Heintzman, and the only disclosure I have is that I am an employee of the Alberta Medical Association.
And I'll just make this statement regarding mitigating potential bias, in that the planning committee has contributed to the consideration of the learning needs and determination of learning objectives, the development of program content, and the choice of speakers or presenters. There's no sponsorship funds that have been received, and the planning committee has reviewed the content of the presentations and ensured that the content presented is evidence-based and free of undue influence. Thank you. Just a quick little reminder for Zoom functions. Please, be aware to mute when you're not speaking. And then, please, we welcome you to turn on your video so we can, see your lovely faces. But if you're doing something else, then that's fine to turn it off. And feel free to also use the open chat button for any, related discussions to the content. And, if you like something, then again, feel free to use the reactions that you have there just at the bottom part of your Zoom screen. Thank you. Next slide. And again, coming back to the purposes of this webinar content, in that we're going to be presenting on quality improvement. And as I mentioned before, hopefully this will give you some practical considerations for your own practice. And next slide. And today's learning objectives include, firstly, to explain the model for improvement and how it can guide quality improvement in a clinic. And secondly, to describe examples of how a quality improvement approach can make clinic processes more efficient, effective, and or patient-centered. And now I think I'll turn it over to Janet here.
Thanks so much, Van. And just to clarify, Van, you said you were from Edmonton, but you're actually in Calgary.
Did I say that? I've got the Oilers on my mind. I'm so sorry, but.
Van is my counterpart in Calgary. She's the AMA ACTT physician champion for the Calgary zone. Thanks, Van. Next slide. So as we usually do, we're going to do a little bit of theory. So I'm going to talk for the next 20-25 minutes, and then we'll allow some discussion time. And we're just recording the theory part and not the discussion part. So I want to start off by just telling you that there are many places you can get data to do quality improvement, to look at changes that you want to make. So these are just some places that you can get data from. I mean, EMRs are amazing. You know, you can pull up lists of your patients in your panel by sex, by age, by disease, by drug that they take. There's so many things that your EMR can do. So it's really, it's a huge tool. And then the HQCA report is great as well. Dr. Oliver David took us through that on a recent webinar, and some of the things that we can get from our HQCA report. So if you missed that one, the recording is available if you want to see it. Next. So here's the bottom line. Here's what we look at. So the sequence to achieve change. So the first thing, oh, I'm just going to pull my blind down because the sun has suddenly come. There we go. So the first thing is to form an improvement team. So you want to think about who needs to be on your team. Now, if you're at a big clinic, you probably don't want every single member to be on the team. It's too many people. But on the other hand, there are some key people that need to be on the team. So, you know, for example, if you're going to do an improvement project that involves phoning patients or scheduling appointments, it's really important that you have a member from reception on your team to take you through that. So, and don't forget your PCN staff. They're so important. Our practice facilitators are a huge asset, so don't forget to include them. The next step is to think about what opportunity you have to improve. So what problem do you have in your clinic? So a common one is access. So, you know, our patients, we can't get them in for appointments when they need to be. So how can we improve that? So that's an example. You want to map your processes before you start. So you want to know, how are you doing things right now? And then it will also give you opportunities to look for changes. The next part is to set an aim statement, identify measures, select changes to test, and do a PDSA cycle. And I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail later. Next is to sustain the gain. So let's say you've done an improvement project and you've improved your access. Well, you don't want to slip back and 6 months later, you're back to where you were. So how are you going to sustain those gains? Then the next thing is to spread the successful changes. So those of you that attended our last webinar, Dr. Carla Laidlaw and Stephanie Balco talked about the Westview PCN's approach to getting more clinics going live on CII-CPAR. So they are spreading their experience so that the rest of us can maybe use some of the tactics that they did to improve our uptake of CII-CPAR. And finally, don't forget to celebrate. That's the fun part. Years ago, I worked with one clinic that had a mammogram screening goal. And once they reached that, all the staff and the doctors went out for pedicures. So it might just be Timbits one morning, but have a goal and celebrate when you get there, because that is what makes it fun and motivates people to work sometimes. Next. Okay, so the model for improvement. What are we trying to accomplish? How will we know that a change is an improvement? What change can we make that will result in an improvement? And then we can do our PDSA cycle, which stands for plan, do, study, and act. Next. So aim. So the first thing is, think about, you know, what are the challenges? What things aren't going well in the clinic? And it might be a really big thing like access, or it might be a really little thing like how we're setting up patients for pap smears. Do we put the label in the room before? Do we put the label in the room after? You know, things like that. How could we make things more more patient-centered, more efficient. Also, think about, is it worth putting a lot of time and effort into making a change? So I'll give you an example of that. So when people look at their access, a lot of times they say, oh, well, our problem is our no-show rate. And if we can reduce our no-show rate, we'll have way better access. Well, the first thing you better do is measure your no-show rate to see what it is to start with. And a lot of primary care clinics, their no-show rate is maybe 3-4%. So if you go from 3-4% to 2%, it's probably not going to make a big difference in your overall access. But I tell you, I worked with a specialty clinic in Edmonton that had 15-month wait times, and their no-show rate was 27%. So when they did put a lot of effort into reducing their no-show rate, and you know, they got it down to about 5%, and that opened up a lot of access for them, and they got their wait time down to 9 months by just doing that little change. So measures are really important as well. You need to do a pre-measurement, and then you make your change and you do a post-measurement. Next. So want to give you a couple of examples as we go through these steps and look at them in more detail. So one is non-medical, and any of you with children know that it's always a struggle to get them out of the door and get them to school on time. And then the other example is a screening example. So a clinic that wants to improve their PAP screening rate. Next. So the first thing is we need to set an aim. So the aim, very similar to a SMART goal, for those of you familiar with SMART goals. So what are we aiming to do, by how much, by when? So for the getting the kids to school on time, we will get all 3 kids to school on time, 5 mornings a week by September 30th, 2022. So there's a date, there's an amount. Next, in the PAP screening result. So this clinic has done their baseline result, and they know that they're currently at 66%. And we will increase our PAP screening rate from 66% to 90% by January 2023. So that means that all women, 90% of women in the clinic will have had a PAP smear within 3 years by January 2023. So then another consideration is you have to make sure that there is something you can measure. So what can we measure? How are we going to measure it? So thinking back to access, a common way to measure access is TNA, which stands for third next available. And the other real important thing about measurement is you want to get just enough data to know if things are improving, but you don't want to have a complicated, time-consuming way that you need to measure. So think about that. And remember that this measurement is for improvement. It's not research. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It just needs to be good enough to give you a picture of what's going on. And it's not for judgment either. So, you know, it's not that we look down at this clinic with a 66% PAP smear rate and say, oh, you guys aren't doing a good job. No, it's just so that they know where they're at and they can improve. Next. Yeah, so measurement is not the goal. Understanding is the goal. We want to understand where we're at and then see if we can improve. And numbers on their own have no context. We need some information to go with it. Next. So measurement can be really simple and straightforward. So the example with getting these 3 girls to school, maybe you use just a sticker chart and you just do it by hand. Or on the next slide, there's an example of using a graph, and there's lots of graphing programs. A lot of EMRs can graph, and often you can annotate your graphs too, so that if you do implement a change, you can just make a note of it, and then you can measure after and see how it improved. So why do we measure over time? So this is an example of a clinic that measured in January and measured in July, and it resulted in improvement. So that's great. But what happened in between January and July? And this is their graph. So that's really important to know, because whatever change they implemented around March actually resulted in a reduced improvement. It wasn't an improvement at all, but then they made another change around May, and that resulted in a better improvement. So it's important to know what happened in March, what happened in May, when you look at the data overall. And if you just had the graph on the left, you wouldn't know that there had been a problem in March. So then we want to look at what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? What's our hunch? What do we think will work? And this is where you want to have a discussion with your improvement team. You can get ideas from the different people in your clinic, other clinics, research or evidence, and also practice facilitators are really helpful. They've worked with other clinics. They've got lots of great ideas too. So for the example of getting the 3 daughters to school on time, so the examples are, so one change we could make is we could make school lunches the night before rather than scrambling the morning of to make them. What about if the girls select their clothing the night before that they want to wear? Or what about if the problem is that the girls aren't hearing the alarm, and maybe we need to use an alarm with a light? So these are 3 hunches or 3 theories. And then you can sort of prioritize them and decide which one you're going to do first. So in this example, it's decided that we're going to select clothing the night before. That's the first thing we're going to try. And then this is going back to our pap smear results. So these are 3 theories of changes that might result in an improved pap smear result percentage. So we could create a PAP flag or notification in our EMR that shows all patients that are overdue for a pap smear. Or we could huddle each morning to see which patients are booked to come in for other things and who's due for a PAP, and can we do the PAP when they're here. Or we could phone all the patients who are overdue. And you can see that each of these also has a amount of work, a time component that's associated with it. So you have to take that into consideration. I mean, maybe the third would be really, really good, but it would take a lot of time to do that. And do you have the time and the staff to do that right now? So the improvement team talked about it, and they decided that the thing that they were going to do first was maybe create the PAP flag notification in our EMR. And the second thing was they were going to huddle each morning to see who's booked and due for a PAP.
One thing I just wanted to point out, Janet, is you were saying that each of these things, requires a bit of work and a bit of resource from within the clinic. And, sometimes we talk about, when we are teaching the model for improvement, about doing it with one physician or one group of patients rather than trying to get the entire clinic, depending on how big it is, right?
Perfect segue to, I believe it's our next slide. Or there's a slide coming up. Yeah. So pick the low-hanging fruit. What are the easy things to do? What isn't going to take as much resources, and maybe do those first. Start small and build. Do little things. And when you're doing a quality improvement project, make sure it's something that you're interested in, that you think is going to result in an improvement. I do a lot of teaching with residents, and one of the residents one time did a quality improvement project about hemochromatosis, which is great, but it's a very small percentage of our patients that have hemochromatosis, right? So something with diabetes, maybe that's kind of not as exciting, but we have a lot more patients with diabetes than we do with hemochromatosis. So, think about things like that. What are you interested in? What's going to result in an improvement for you at your clinic? Next. Okay, so then we're ready to test the change. So just a reminder, when we're doing a PDSA cycle, a plan, do, study, act cycle, the planning is, what change are we going to try? And then you have to narrow down the details of it. Who's going to do it, when, why, where, for how long, all those sorts of things. And then who's going to measure, make sure you've done a pre-measurement. And then also, what's your prediction? What do you think will happen? Then you do it. And then at the end, you say, what did we actually do and what happened? Then you study it and you look at your measurements, and did our measurements compare to our prediction? Did we make an improvement? What have we learned? And then finally, you act on it. So are you going to adapt this change? Are you going to adopt this change? Or are you going to abandon this change? And just remember that often one PDSA cycle sort of leads to another. So looking back at the example of getting the 3 girls to school on time, if the first thing you try is them choosing their clothes the night before, maybe after that you get a little bit of improvement, but not a lot. So maybe the next thing is you pack the school lunches the night before. And then, after that, you might try something else and you go from there. So yeah, it's really important once you've done all this to look at your changes, and, should you adapt it? So should you continue doing it going forward, but maybe make a few slight tweaks? Do you adopt it? Do you continue on doing that change exactly as it is? Or do you abandon it? And when you abandon it, is there something else that you can try that you've learned because of doing this? So it's not just throwing it away, but really studying it and looking at why it didn't work, and what you can do going forward. So test on a small scale and build knowledge sequentially. Collect data over time. Okay, and this is what Angela was talking about. Include a range of conditions for testing. And the next slide is going to talk about that. So maybe for the girls, you want to do really tiny PDSA cycles. So the first evening, just the oldest girl lays out her clothes. The second evening, maybe the youngest kid lays out her clothes, because maybe the oldest kid doesn't really care what she wears and she grabs clothes in the morning and she's not causing any delays. Maybe the youngest daughter is really picky about what she wears and changes her mind, and she's the one that's causing the delays in the morning. And then maybe by the third evening, you try all 3 kids laying out their clothes, and then you see what's working, what's not. And for the pap smear example, so maybe the first day you huddle and review one doc's day and just have one patient that's overdue for pap, and you do that pap smear that day. And then if that went well, maybe on Wednesday you huddle and you review one doc's day and you select 3 patients that are due for pap. And maybe you do the pap smear at that visit, or maybe you tell them and you book them another day. So that's something else you have to decide on ahead of time. And maybe the next Monday you select all patients due for pap. And when the processes are working well, maybe you test with another doctor. And then finally you can spread to all the doctors in the clinic who are interested. So there are worksheets that you can use, and the advantage of using a worksheet is that you've got a written record, so that, in 2022, when you say, I think we tried doing that in 2014, but it didn't work. Well, you've got a written record and you can go back and see what happened. So if you don't write down some of this stuff, memory is short and we forget details and we forget things. Next. Yeah, practice facilitators. Wow, they are just such a benefit for us. And studies have shown that physicians are 2.76 times more likely to implement evidence-based changes with the support from a PF. So the PCN staff, use them if you can to help you with some of this work. All right, so are there any questions before we go into our breakout rooms to have a little discussion about this? You can just put your questions in the chat.
So far, no questions, but we do have one comment that I agree totally. PFs are so important.
Glad everyone is back and hope the discussion was good. Physician champions can put some comments that came up from their rooms in the chat, and we'll just go through them real quick. So in my room, some of our big tips that came out are go smaller, do one thing first and build from there. Make sure you assign people to do the various tasks like measurement and so on. We can learn from changes that don't result in an improvement. And one of the clinics had a sort of a motto, fail fast, fail forward. And we really liked that. Can anyone add some stuff to the chat? Okay, so Van's got one here. Communication and change management strategies are keys in moving forward with any change planning action. So, right, people need to know why the change is needed and why there's a problem. So buy-in, I guess, is what I think Van is talking about there. And part of that communication also is making sure that people are assigned to do the various tasks. And Jill has a good one. The people who do the work must change the work. So it's really, I learned early in my career that it didn't work well when the physicians told the staff what to do. It needed to be more of a two-way conversation where the physicians talk to the staff about problems, and they helped come up with solutions, and then we tested the solutions. Joseph says, start with small changes, low-hanging fruit to encourage team members.
And Dr. Laidlaw's comment is similar to mine. We were in the same group, but yeah, make sure you include a member from each clinic area in decision making, and then people will be motivated to make the change.
Right.
And also we talked about making sure that you give credit to those people as well. So, you know, instead of just saying, Dr. Laidlaw's made this fantastic improvement, it was Dr. Laidlaw and, you know, these other people who, you know, worked on this panel. And then that flowed into a conversation about kind of using competition a little bit. So, you know, Dr. Laidlaw's team and this team did this great improvement. And then, you know, other people might be interested in doing the same.
Okay, so celebrate. Again, we're talking about celebrating. And Joseph makes the point, every team member's opinion matters. So make sure you hear from everyone. Yeah, and COVID has put a damper on some of our celebrations, but there's other ways we can celebrate for sure.
I like Erin's phrasing here, go for the least viable product when designing changes. You can always continue improving. Yeah, so that's another way of saying start small, actually, in a different way. And then Sue says keep measuring to help sustain improvements.
Right, because if you stop measuring, you won't know where you're at. And again, another plug for how important practice facilitators are. They're the key to change management.
Small bets, big bets. That's good.
And Joseph, again, talking about documenting your changes using a PDSA worksheet or something. Yeah, and Sarah Joy saying engagement is a continuous process. It's ongoing for sure. So I just want to remind everyone that there are credits available that you can claim for these sessions. It does take a few weeks for, like for this session, don't look for it today. It'll take a few weeks for it to show up, but maybe once every 6 months or once a year, you might want to go to the AMA website and you can print off your certificates or make a note of them and enter your credits in the College of Family Physicians of Canada website to record them. Next. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this is fairly new, but I did want to mention that the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta has brought out a PPIP. It's called the Physician Practice Improvement Program. And it, so when you're, most of us are on, our practices get reviewed every 5 years. So when you come up for your next cycle, they've changed it a little bit, and physicians are going to do 1 personal development and 2 quality improvement activities over their 5-year cycle. So my point is that quality improvement is something that we're going to have to do. So we might as well enjoy it. We might as well make it relevant, and we might as well do it well so that it makes a difference. If I don't have a lot of details, but there is a little more information on the college website if you're interested. Next. So I just want to mention that our next session, we're taking a break over the summer because many of you are going to take holidays. So our next session will be in September on the 21st. And the topic is team building, practical tips for engaging your team. You will receive a summary email and an evaluation link. And we want to thank you very much and wish you all a great summer. And a final slide. Just a reminder that you can communicate with us if you have ideas or feedback or requests, networks@albertadoctors.org. If there's any final questions, just put them in the chat. And I think it was a great session. Thanks so much for participating, everyone.
Yeah, have a great summer, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.